let's get started with ASP.NET. Before understanding what is ASP.NET, let's try to understand what is a web application. What is a web application? Do you have any idea? Anyone? Can you answer what is a web application? No. Good. So a web application is an application which runs on client server mode. Okay. And again, you require web to access this application. Do you know what is web, right? Internet or intranet, whatever. Okay. So you require web to access it, and it is a client server based application. So what is a client server based application? Let me quote an example, and with which you can understand what is a web application or what is client server mode. So think of a newspaper agency. Fine. So, or think of some magazine or some publication company which publishes a magazine. Fine. So how will you get the magazine? So if you are a client, how will you get the magazine? You will make a request, and or you will make a subscription, and they'll respond to you with that magazine, with whatever you have requested, right? Here also, when we are dealing with client server based web applications, we should understand that the client would be making a request for some resource on your server side, and the server would be responding back with that resource. Fine, whatever it is, whether it is an image or whether it is a HTML file or whether it is a XML file, whatever it might be. Usually client would be making a request and the server would be responding back with a response. Making sense? And here this remote server, so server would be remote, so both of them, they might not be present on the same same machine or same server. Okay, however, this remote server would be taking care of all the responses from multiple clients. So you would not be the only person who would be subscribing for that magazine, right? So usually publication companies, they will not run on one client. So in the same manner, this web application may have multiple other clients. Making sense? We'll forget about this browser, internet, and all other terms. Okay, but we'll get back to that once we discuss the few key terms associated with your web-based application or web application or web interface. Fine. So when we are talking about web, so any type of communication, for any type of communication to happen, so there should be some protocol, right? We know what is a protocol. Protocol is a set of rules which both the parties should be abiding by so that communication happens between both of them, right? So think that both of us, we wanted to communicate. Okay, we'll decide on when we will meet or how we will meet and what would be the medium, etc., right? So in this way, in similar way, for two different parties to communicate over certain medium, there would be some set of rules which are predefined and which are universally accepted, so that which will help them in communicating effectively using the predefined medium, right? And here our medium is web. So there is a protocol associated with your web-based communication called as HTTP. We know what is HTTP, right? Good. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So what is HTTP? HTTP is the set of rules which would be guiding the communication over web. Making sense? And again, for both of us to communicate, so think that we understood that we'll get together in a meeting every day at 7 p.m. and we'll discuss the concepts associated with your .NET. Okay, for that we understood that both the parties, both of us, we should be having internet, and you should be having a good machine setup, and you should be having some proper headset and proper mic. So all these things are required which are guided using your HTTP. Fine, for example. And now we should understand each other's language, right? For communication to happen, that I know language and you know one other language, so both of us, we can't communicate, right? Obviously, if we are in front of each other, we can communicate using signs, which is the most primitive way of communication. But in normal sense, you will be requiring some language which is understood by all the parties or all the stakeholders, so that the communication can happen between them. Making sense? So in the same way, when we are talking about client server based communication which happens over web using a web application, then you should understand that there should be some commonly accepted language or commonly accepted mode of communication, which both the parties should be understanding, right? So this language is called as HTML. Okay, and remember, HTML is the only language understood by your browser. Okay, when we are think that you are using ASP.NET or you're using MVC or whatever .NET based web application development technologies, then your browser or your end client, it understands. We'll get there. We'll get there. Don't worry. So your end user understands or your browser understands only HTML. Fine. So your ASP.NET or any .NET based code should be converted into HTML so that the end user understands it. Making sense? And again, even if you are using Java to create the web-based application and you have created JSP pages, okay, even that would be converted into HTML for making your client understand. So your client understands only HTML. So your web-based communication happens only using HTML. Okay, there might be some other universal languages which can be understood by your browser like your XML, but most standard form to display your web-based content would be HTML. Fine? Good. The third thing which is required for you to communicate over web is client. We understood that it is a client server based architecture, right? So you require a client and you require a server, right? Before getting to client, you should understand what is a server first. Let me explain what is a server. So think that I have created an application which looks similar to your Skype. Okay, then I wanted to give it to all of you, three of you maybe, so that you can use it. So you three of you are my clients. So how will you make use of that application? So think that you are trying to make use of Skype. How will you utilize it, or how will you start using it? You'll have to install it somewhere, right? So you'll install it in your local machine. So this type of applications are called as desktop based applications because they get executed on your local machine and they get utilized by a person on the same machine, right? However, as we are talking about web-based applications which require web, so the code which you have written should be shared over web, right? So the machine where the code is located should be connected to web, right? So this machine which is connected over the web and which hosts the application's code or web application's code is called as a server. Fine. And what are other responsibilities associated with your server? It should be capable of responding to requests received from your client. Fine, making sense? It should be capable of responding back to the requests received by your client. Okay, think that you work for the Hindu group. Okay, Hindu group is a publication company. So some of your clients might be requesting for Hindu newspaper, some of them might be requesting you for Frontline magazine, some of them might be requesting you for Sports Star magazine, right? So in this way, and some of them might be requesting you for quarterly subscriptions, some of them might be requesting for special editions. So there would be many resources at your end, and few of the clients might require some resources and few of them might be requiring some other requests. So this server in similar way should be capable of responding to all the requests made by your clients, if the requests are authentic and if the client is authorized to make a request. Making sense? Good. So usually when we talk about this server in technical terms would be called as web server. What is that called as? It's called as web server. Making sense or not? So server is nothing but your web server. And what is fine, when we wanted to be precise on what is web server and how is it different from the server, okay, or when we wanted to get into very precise details of the server, we should understand that we will not be caring about anything on your end machine or end clients, or your web server, except some part or some component of your server or some application running on that server which would be taking care of your request, right? So think that the server is a Windows 2007 server, and it hosts multiple other things, right? So the server usually will not hold only one application. It might be holding some monitoring tools, it might be holding some semantic tools, it might be holding some enterprise based routing tools. Anything can be there, right? However, we don't care about everything which is present on that server or which is installed on that server. We'll be taking care of, or we'll be worried about only one component existing on that server, which is called as web server. So by this you should understand that web server is not the machine which is holding the code, but it is a application which is running on that machine, which will be holding your code and which will take the responsibility of responding back to your request from the client. Making sense? Good. So this application which runs on a machine connected to your web and which responds back to the client's request with the appropriate resources is called as a web server. And here there are multiple web servers available in the market, or multiple softwares which will handle your web server based applications available over the market. However, in our case, we are using a Microsoft based technology called as .NET, so we would be using something called as IAS. Making sense? I have a question here. So I don't want to use IAS, and I already have a other web server which I am using for Java based applications, and that is called as Tomcat server. Can I go ahead and use Tomcat server with my application? Can you make a guess and answer this question? No? In reality, yes. Okay, you can use. Fine. So okay, let me explain you. Okay, so the main okay, so the main function of your web server is to get the request or receive the request from your clients and respond back with associated resources they are requesting for. Okay, and this can be done by any web server. Okay, usually in reality it happens that there might be a portfolio of applications running on the same server. Okay, and these applications are related to each other, and sometimes they might be cross platform, like a Java application and a .NET application and a PHP application. Fine, making sense? So three of them are existing on the same machine. So your release manager might feel that instead of deploying the code on three different servers, I would like to deploy it on only one web server. Fine. Then he can use Tomcat only. Okay, he don't have to use IIS or any other web server. Okay, but most of the time .NET based applications have highest compatibility with IIS. That's the reason why we use IIS. Because why so? They are created by the same manufacturer or same vendor, right? So that's the reason why many times we use most of the end clients, even in real time or in enterprise based applications, they will use Internet Explorer, SQL Server, IIS and .NET. Making sense? Everything are created by Microsoft. So they'll take care of, or they'll create the applications taking into consideration their other applications which should be compatible with them, right? Understood? Good. Next, the next keyword or next key component associated with your web-based application development is your client. Okay, when we are talking about our client, okay, think that you wanted to access a website. Okay, will you use Windows Explorer for accessing your website, or will you use MS Paint for accessing it, or will you use MS Word for accessing, or will you use Chrome or Internet Explorer for accessing a website? Chrome, right? So these applications, obviously the client is a machine, or the client is the end user's machine, which will be used for communicating with your web server. Okay, but similar to our web server's case, where we understood that we are not worried about the total machine, but we are worried about one application or one software which is running on your machine, which takes care of the requests and response back to them appropriately. Similar way, on your client side, you should understand that we will be worrying about only one application which is running on the end client's machine, and this application is called as a web browser, right? Good. Again, I have a question. Okay, so when we are deploying our code, okay, when we are deploying our code, uh, will this web browser understand your C# code? You have created a .NET based application which is written using your C#. Will it understand C#? Yes or no? Make a guess. Try to think. No. Good. What will it understand? Only HTML. Excellent. So, however, when we are talking about ASP.NET based application development, obviously you will be using some code behind, which would be written in your C# or VB.NET or any other .NET based language, right? So how will this C# code get executed by your browser? Any guess? Say yes or no. Good. That is code behind file, obviously. Good. Let me explain it. Okay, so usually your code would be divided into two different types of code. Okay, the code which you create when we are creating a ASP.NET based web application would be divided into two different types. Fine. first type is called as client-side code. Fine. First type is called as client-side code. What is a client-side code? Here HTML and here images and here XML or here client-side scripting languages like JavaScript. Making sense? All these are called as your client-side code. Fine. And basically images image definitely is not a code, but it would be the client-side component. Fine. CSS, good. Style sheets. Okay. Understood? Good. So all of them, why are they called as client-side code components? Because they can be directly understood by your browser. Fine? Making sense? Good. However, there is some other type of code which we write when we are creating a web-based application, and that is your C# or your VB.NET or any other .NET based language. Fine. Good. So these are called as, so these cannot be understood by your browser. So these languages, the first type of languages, they are called as client-side code, and this second type of languages which are understood only by your server or which cannot be understood by your browser or client are called as server-side languages. Making sense? Good. So how will your server-side languages, how will your web server understand your server side code? How will it understand? Obviously, for understanding these .NET framework supported languages, you should be having .NET framework, right? Yes or no? When we were understanding .NET framework, we understood that .NET framework contains all the components which will understand your C# or whatever language, .NET based language code, and which will help in getting them executed, right? So yes or no? Prakriti, Sai Krishna, what's happening with you? Are you there? Guys, this topic is very important. That's the reason why I am explaining it very slowly. Still, if you are not attentive, I can't help it. Sai Krishna, are you there? I don't know if he's attentive or not. Okay, fine. So on your IIS side or on your web server side, you will be installing .NET framework on your web server. Fine. .NET framework. So .NET framework would be installed on your server, and whenever some C# code needs to be executed, a call would be made back to your server from the client, and that particular component would be executed, and the client-side code would be manipulated accordingly and sent back in form of HTML to your client again. Right? Understood? So what will happen when server-side code, or when the code behind needs to get executed, a server call needs to be made, and client makes a server call again, and it receives the updated response from your server in form of HTML. Making sense? Good. So did we understand what is client side code, what is server side code, what is HTTP, what is HTML, what is browser, what is IIS? Good. So again, let's move on to the deployment terms. Okay, so here usually you will not be writing your HTML code directly. Okay, and obviously you can go ahead and use your HTML for creating your web forms in ASP.NET, but still you will be writing some code component, or you will be writing some writing the client side code in a markup file called as ASPX file. Fine. Why is it called as ASPX file? Because the extension of the files where this markup will be created is called as ASPX. So that's the reason why we use ASP.NET based client-side mechanism, or client-side scripting, or client-side coding language, which is in general terms called as your markup language, and this is called as your ASPX file in your .NET. Fine, because it contains ASP code. Good. And the server side code, or the ASP.NET based code behind file, will be your aspx.cs file. Good. aspx dot cs file. Making sense? Good. When you build the code, okay, when you build the code, what will get created? When you build the code, what will get created? We discussed it earlier. I'm not sure if you still remember things or not. When you deploy the code, or when you build the code, your binaries or assemblies will get created, right? Your C# code will get converted into your MSIL. What, guys, you forgot it or what? So your MSIL would be stored in what? Your executable files, or PE files, or your assemblies, right? Bin folder, obviously, correct. Fine. So the C# code gets converted into DLLs, and your ASPX code remains same. Fine. So obviously when you are deploying your code onto the web server, you will deploy the DLLs along with your ASPX files. Making sense? Good. So let's move on. I think Sai Krishna is not back. He might have got some call. Okay, good. Now let's try to understand. Till now we have understood what is your web-based application development, what are the prerequisites, or what are the different terms associated with it. Now let's try to understand something called as ASP.NET. Fine. So what is ASP.NET? ASP.NET is a web application framework developed and marketed by Microsoft to allow programmers to build dynamic websites. Fine. So what is ASP.NET? ASP.NET is a framework which helps you in creating your web applications. Fine. And who owns ASP.NET? Here Microsoft owns it. Good. Fine. Now, this type of applications are web applications which are created using your ASP.NET. They are called as web forms applications. Fine, because each and every page you create using your ASP.NET would be rendered as a web form. Fine. Good. So, what are ASP.NET web forms? Okay, based on the ASP.NET technology in which code that runs on the server dynamically generates web page output to the browser or client device, these applications are called as web forms. Okay, first thing what they do, they use your ASP.NET based technology, and they convert or they use the code which is being written in your ASP.NET, like your C# based code or whatever code. They will use this server side code to create HTML dynamically, so that the web browser understands it and renders it dynamically. Fine. Making sense? So whatever code you write, whether it is your ASPX code or whether it is your CS code, okay, at the end your browser understands only HTML. So based on the server side functionality, the HTML would be dynamically updated, or it would be created dynamically, making the use of both the ASPX and CS files, and that would be sent back to your browser for getting it rendered on client side. Making sense? Good. And this ASP.NET Web Forms based applications, or ASP.NET Web Forms, are compatible with any browser or mobile device, and an ASP.NET web page automatically renders the correct browser compliant HTML for features such as styles, layouts, and so on. Okay, so there are multiple web browsers available in the market, right? So we know Chrome, we know Internet Explorer, we know Safari, we know Netscape Navigator, and we know Mozilla Firefox. There are multiple types of browsers available in the market, right? So based on the browser whatever you are using, the ASPX code or ASP.NET web page which is created using the ASP.NET technology, it gets rendered correctly or uniformly or similarly across all the browsers available in the market. Making sense? Good. And it is compatible with any language supported by the .NET based common language runtime, such as your Visual Basic or Visual C#. Understood? And as we understood earlier, it uses Microsoft .NET framework. Okay, so that's the reason why it takes the benefit of all the best features available with your .NET framework, like your type safety, like your inheritance, and like your managed environment, etc., etc., right? So all the benefits associated with your .NET framework are default available with your ASP.NET. Making sense? And it is very flexible, because you can add user created and third party controls to them. Okay, we will understand what are user created and third party controls in our future classes. Okay, but for now understand that there can be some customized controls which can be created and used dynamically by your ASP.NET web applications. Making sense? Good. Now, before coming here, we'll try to understand. Good. Fine. This would be the appropriate point. Okay, fine. So usually, as we understood, your user, so think that this is your user. Okay, this is your client, and this box is your server. Understood? So as we understood earlier here, and this box is embedded inside your IIS. As we discussed, IIS is your web server. Okay, and the client using the browser makes a request for some page. Fine. And what happens? There will be multiple activities associated with your request, and usually multiple operations would be taken care on your web server side before the response is received by your user. Fine. So when you ask the web server for certain resources which are deployed on it, then that is called as request. Fine. Again, there are two terms which you should understand. One is request. Understood? And the server responds back with something called as response. Making sense? So what is request? When the client requests or asks for certain resource which is deployed on your server, that is called as request. And when the server responds back with the resource which is requested by the client, then that is called as request. Okay, we'll get into details of it, but before that, let's try to understand what is a request life cycle. Okay, what is a request life cycle? Request lifecycle is a series of stages or events which would be happening across your client and your server before the response is received by your client. Fine. There would be multiple activities happening across your user and your server, or your client and your server. So all these actions put together are called as your request lifecycle. Making sense? Good. So let's try to understand what is a request lifecycle. Usually, as we understood, there are multiple stages or multiple actions happening associated with your request. So first thing, user will make a request to your server, and inside that server, as we understood earlier, the .NET framework would be installed on your server, right? So otherwise it can't understand the what is that .NET based code which is written using your C# or VB, right? Yes or no? Good. So before getting into that point, let me explain you few things. Let me explain you few things. Do you know what is a process? Do you know what is a process? Yes, what is a process, Vishwa? Vishwa, what is a process? Collection of threads. Good. So what will process do? We discussed it in our previous classes. What's happening with you guys? Are you not revising? Usually, your application or any application which is running on your machine would be accessing the resources associated with that machine, like the processor time and your memory, using something called as process. So think that I have PowerPoint running on my machine now. Okay, so if you go to task manager and hit on the processes tab, you will understand that there will be some process created for your PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint would be accessing all the server's resources using this process. Making sense? Good. I have one more question now. Think that there are 10 different applications. So when we are running the web-based application, or when we are running the web server on your server on your application server, okay, so that should be IaaS should be having some process associated with it, right? And all the applications running on your IaaS would be utilizing the server's resources using that process. Yes or no? Good. And this process associated with your ASP.NET, which helps the web server in executing the web applications dynamically, is called as ASP.NET Worker Process. Fine. So what is worker process? Worker process is a process running on your server's machine, and it will be used for utilizing the server side resources by your ASP.NET application running on it. Understood? Let me extend my question now. Think that there are 10 applications running on my web server. Okay, there are 10 web-based applications running on my web server. Will there be 10 different worker processes running on your web server? Yes? No. Ideally, there would be only one worker process. Understood? So, how will these 10 applications share one process to access the server side resources? We'll get into that point. Okay? Is it making sense now? Good. So, let's try to understand how your application gets executed. So, before getting there, for every so think that you are asking for some image files. Okay, so as we discussed earlier, your web browser can display images also, right? So think that you are purely asking for a image file. Fine. And you might also be requesting for XML file. Fine. And you might also be requesting for some other type of file. So based on the resource which you are trying to access, or which you are requesting for from the client side, the server would have some DLL which would be taking care of, or your IaaS will be having some DLL which would be taking care of requests of a particular type. So for every particular type of request, you will have a DLL associated with it, which will take care of rendering that request or responding back for that request. Understood? Somebody seems to have a question. What is that question? Sai Krishna, what is your question? Yes. Not these DLLs are not related to our application. Okay, so they are specific DLLs. So if you see, your Windows folder contains 100 DLLs or 1000 DLLs, right? So So these are not our application related DLLs. Okay, so these are related to your system, okay, or web server. So your web server will be having multiple DLLs which will be taking care of requests associated with requests of multiple types. Okay, for example, for images there can be one DLL. Okay, and for XML files there can be some other DLL. For config files there can be some other DLL. Making sense? So in this way, the DLL which handles certain set of requests on your server side is called as your ASP DLL. Understood? Making sense or not? Good. So for all the requests associated with your ASP.NET based resources like your ASPX file, there will be some ISAP DLL which will be taking care of all these requests, and that ISAP DLL is called as ASP Net ISAP DLL. Fine. So if you are requesting for a ASP.NET based resource like your ASPX file, okay, that would be routed to a ASP.NET ISAP DLL. I did not get you. What is ISAP? Okay, ISAP, as I said, is your server component. Okay, Windows Server component which will handle all the requests associated with some type. Okay, there will be multiple ISAPs associated with your web server. Okay, so our ASP.NET has a ISAP called as your ASP.NET ISAP DLL. Fine, making sense? Good. So this ISAP DLL, what it will do? Think that you have 10 applications deployed on your web server. Fine, and these 10 applications, they were created very much newly, and none of them got a request till now. Okay, nobody requested for any application till now. Okay, and all of a sudden one of these applications, they got a request, and for certain page associated with it. Okay, there is some page called as homepage.aspx, and somebody requested for this homepage.aspx, and think that this is the first request to that web server, and none of the other applications are, including this particular application, have received a request till now. Fine. In that case, for the first time, your web server will create, or your ISAP DLL on your web server will create something called as ASP.NET environment. Fine. This environment would be used to execute your ASP.NET based request from that point onwards. Fine. Good. So when one of these applications hosted on this particular web server receives a request for the first time, fine, then the ISAP DLL or the web server for that matter would create a environment called as ASP.NET environment, and and from that point onwards all the requests associated with your ASP.NET based applications would be executed in this environment. Fine. Understood? Think that you have started a car repair shop. Okay, then for the first time, whenever you are before you start receiving your first client, you should be creating some environment which contains some wrenches, some spanners, some hydraulic machines to lift your cars. Everything should be there, right? Similarly, that environment would be created for the first time on your web server as well. Are we good? Did we understand till this point? once the environment gets created, think that there is a second request received by your web server, and this is not related to your first application, but this is related to your second application. Fine. So the execution happens using only one process, right? We understood that there will be only one worker process, even if you have 10 applications or 100 applications also, right? Understood or not? Good. So how will each application gets itself demarked inside the same process being consumed by all the applications? Okay, in some way you should demark it, right? So saying that, think that four of you friends are living in an apartment. Okay, somehow you should have your own domain inside that apartment, which you would be using for your personal purpose, right? So you'll be sharing 4 rooms among your four of you, right? So in similar way, each and every application which gets executed inside your ASP.NET Worker process or inside your ASP.NET environment on your web server will have clear demarcation between each other, and each and every application will have a domain associated with it called as application domain. Making sense? Is it clear or not? Do you have any confusion? Do you have any questions? Will the request is other than ASP.NET? No, no need. No need, Vishwa. You don't need a ASP.NET framework, right? For sending, think that somebody is requesting for a HTML. Okay, so HTML is, even if you share it directly also, it gets access directly, right? Do one thing, connect your laptop with some other machine. Okay, share, ask your friend to share some HTML file on his machine and start accessing it. Okay, using your browser. Okay, see whether it gets access directly or not. It will, you need not have a web server also, it will directly get accessed. You'll get it. Okay, in that way you will need a ASP.NET environment when you wanted to utilize all the features of your ASP.NET. Otherwise you don't need it. Making sense, for sure? Is it clear? Good. Now, did we understand what is app domain? App domain is is a domain associated with each and every web application running on the same web server. Fine. You have created a app domain. Now I have a question. Okay. When the second application receives a request, okay, will you again create ASP.NET environment? No. Good. So the second application received the request for the first time. Will you create a app domain for that? Good. The second application received a request for the second time. Will you create a app domain for that again? No. Good. Then you are clear. Awesome. Good. So now once the app domain is created, okay, so we understood that ASP.NET is a object-oriented programming based language. So C# or VB, whatever you use, they are object-oriented programming based languages, right? So there are four different objects which would be created once you start receiving requests from your clients. Okay, so once the app domain is created, you will create four different objects. Fine. And these four different objects also, they fine, I'll get back to that point, don't worry. Think that there are four different objects which would be created. Okay, and before these four objects gets created, you will also create something called as HTTP runtime. Fine. So there is a object called as HTTP runtime which gets created. Okay, what is this HTTP runtime? This HTTP runtime will handle the all the web requests, and it will route your request or get your request processed during the runtime dynamically. Fine. So your ASP.NET code should be converted into certain manner which can be understood by your browser, right? So your HTTP runtime will contain all the resources which might be required for this conversion. Understood? Good. Once this runtime is created, now again your core objects would be created. What are the different four core objects associated with your ASP.NET web application? Okay, and remember, when we are talking about an object, you should understand that there is a class associated with it in your framework. Fine. So first thing, your request, okay, your request would be created into a object. Okay, your HTTP request is a class in your .NET framework, and your object of this HTTP class would be a HTTP request class would be created. Fine. What does it contain? It contains details associated with your request, like what resource you are trying to request for and what type of resource it is. Fine. And what is the location of it. Understood? And what is the session IDs or request IDs associated with it. All the details associated with your request would be encapsulated into a object called as HTTP request object. Fine. No, no, Sai. You will require it mandatorily. Fine. And as we understood earlier, you will also have something called as response associated with it, right? So you will also create one other object called as HTTP response object, which will hold all the properties associated with your response. Making sense? Good. In real time, again, you might have written some code associated with the code which is standard across your application, and this code can be used to execute or handle some server side events, right? For example, think that when your request gets started or when the application gets started, you wanted to execute something. For example, when you are when somebody is asking for a request, okay, think that you have created a website and you wanted this website not to be accessed by somebody from North America, okay, and it should be available only for Europe and Asian customers. Then you can handle it by using some event called as your app start event, right? We understood what is a event earlier, right? What is a event? Event is a system notification or user action which can be handled, right? Good. So I'll show you where this event should be handled. Where the application events would be handled. This is a simple ASP.NET Web application which we have created earlier. So I'll show you how to handle the application level events. So did you ever come across a web page or a website which throws a weird error saying that it displays some part of the code and it says there is a error in the application? Did you ever come across a error on any website of that sort? Yes or no? No? Good. Did you ever come across a customized message which says there is a error on your application site, please contact your administrator? Did you ever come across this kind of error? Good. So usually what happens when some error happens on your at your runtime, okay, this error needs to be handled. So it will usually, if you don't handle it, it will show your code on the browser, okay, and it will show the point of code which where the error has occurred. Okay, it will show your code literally on the screen. Understood? So in real time, what the developers will do, there is some file called as global.asax file. Are you able to see that? If I click it, I'll be seeing many event handlers called as application start, session start, application begin request, application authenticate request, and apart from that there is something called as application error. Are you able to see that? Good. Inside this they'll say redirect or send the request to some other page called as error page, which shows that some error has occurred or there is some problem with your website, please contact the administrator. Fine. So that code would be written here. Making sense? So this method is associated with a application level event called as application error. What is a event? Event is a system notification. So when will this notification get fired? Whenever there is a error, that event or notification would get fired, and that will have a associated event handler called as application error in your global.asax file, and this method would be called, and in this you will write some logic to redirect it to the error page. Making sense? Similarly, you might want to do something when your application is getting started, and you might want to do something when your application is about to get closed, right? So all these are your application level events. Did you understand what is application level event now? Good. So all the application level events would be present in your global.asax file, and these events will have a handlers associated with them in your global.asax file. Making sense? Understood? I know this is new for you, but you should somehow remember these things. Okay, you should get a clear understanding of it, because all the future topics are dependent on these. Did you understand what is global.asax file? Prakriti, Sai Krishna, what's happening with you? Good. So now, if you see, this global.asax file is derived from a base class called as HTTP application class, right? Are you able to see that? And and this this global.asax file contains all the application code associated with all the application level event handlers. And what happens, you'll have to create an object associated with this as well, right? When you are accessing, or when you have received a request for the first time, you should create a object out of this global.asax file as well, right? So if you see, there is a HTTP application object which is Do you see HTTP application object here, which would be created? This application object is one of the core objects, and it would hold the global.asax file as a object. Understood? It will hold the details related to your application level events. Apart from that, there is one other thing called as HTTP context class, and this context class holds the details associated with your application. Okay, few other details like your uh, what all different resources would be there, what are application level IDs, what are your application level resources and client related features, everything would be there in your context object, right? So 4 different objects called as core objects would be created. Making sense? Good. And now once these core objects are created, so when we are talking about your ASP.NET based web application, we understood that it is about web pages, right? Creating web pages. So for example, think that you are opening Gmail. Okay, there would be multiple screens associated with your Gmail, right? First screen would be asking you to give your user ID and password, and once you log in, you will be redirected to your mail page, and on click of the compose button, it might be redirecting you to some other page, right? And when you click on settings, it will take you to settings page. Making sense or not? So each and every uh, predefined user interface associated with a proper business requirement is called as a web page. Making sense? Every different view associated with your application is called as a web page. So your total ASP.NET web application is related to multiple web pages, and each web page is created using a HTML or ASPX file. Did we understand? Good. So this particular each and every web page associated with a view of your application would be a ASPX file, and this would be tagged to a CS file associated with it called as aspx.cs file, which we have understood earlier, right? So if you see, I have multiple pages associated with my application, like my default page, like my user details, or like my web form 1, web form 2. Multiple pages are there, right? So if you see, each page has some file called as aspx.cs file associated with it. Making sense? Good. So if you see, this page is again derived from a system.web.ui.page class, right? Understood? Are you able to see that? And when you have requested for your default.aspx file, the object of type page should be created, right? Because the page is the base class of your default, right? So every page is a class. When you are requesting for a page object associated would be associated with that page would be created, right? And that would help you in creating the HTML, which can be understood based on the server side logic associated with it, and which can be understood by your browser, right? And there are multiple stages associated with your page object creation till the page object gets destroyed. Fine. Like how there are multiple stages associated with your request, starting from the request getting initiated till the response being received. Similar to that, your page also has multiple events associated with it, starting from creation of your page object till the destroying of your page object. Understood? These events put together are called as page life cycle events. Sai Krishna, is it making sense? And page life cycle is a part of your request life cycle. Understood? We will discuss what is page life cycle in our tomorrow's class, and we'll try to understand what are different stages associated with your page life cycle. Fine. Do we have any questions on what we have discussed today? Good. Then we are fine. We'll drop off our session for today, and we'll meet tomorrow. And as discussed, from today onwards, if we have observed, we have increased the duration of the class. Most probably you'll be having a session somewhere between one hour to 1.5 hours every day. Fine, please be prepared for that. Good. Thanks so much for joining the class today. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.